Good morning and welcome to our live broadcast. Thank you for History 232, the Middle East from 1453 to the present. And it looks like everyone can see the screen and you can also hear me. All right, so two goals for today, updates and questions, and then the content presentation. I'm going to move into Mehmet Ali and Egypt. So let me go into the updates. Uh, First, you all may be interested in this, and if you are, you can send me an email. But on Monday, this coming Monday, it should be the 22nd at 1 o'clock. I have a program with the National Archives in Washington, D.C., for about an hour, and they will present what is called DocuTeach, Documents Teach. And if you're interested in participating, just send me an email and then I will give them your name and then I will send you the link when they send it to me to join because they only let in individuals that are on the list. And Katie Munn, Munn, who works at the National Archives, will at least it's an introduction to documents. I wish we could do one in Istanbul, but given everything that's been happening, it's a little hard to set that up remotely at this point. If we were on campus, it'd be a lot easier to do that with the technological resources there. So, if you're interested in hearing about how what documents are available, at least at our archives here, and they'll be similar to other archives throughout the world. You'll get a good introduction to that, and it'll help you in other history courses. So um, they just emailed me this morning saying we're all set, ready to go with that. So if you want to join us, just send me an email and say I'd like to participate. So then I'll send them your name, and then they'll send me the links, and then I can send the links out. So it's 1 o'clock our time, Central Standard Time. All right, so that's an opportunity for you. All right, exam one, you should be working on, and it's due by Saturday at 11:59. If you run into some difficulties on that, you can always let me know. I'd be glad to help you on it. 3 essays, the modules, all 5 of the modules have been open for you to use in getting those worked on. I put a link in this morning, late last night, this morning, so you can submit um, your 3 essays. Um, I think when I set it up and you went to the essays to find them, the study questions, I think you can submit them there as well. But I just, excuse me, wanted to make sure. So I put in what is called exam one submittal. So then you can upload those and you should be ready to go. All right. So we know that modules open on Monday. They close on Saturday for work. The case study comes in a little earlier. Set that for Friday. But if you need to roll it over, but all the work should be completed by Saturday at 11:59. Sunday I use for grading, so there'll be a lot this weekend that I have to work on. So week 5 is Mehmet Ali, who is really significant. He's very important. He's an Albanian, but he's really responsible for a lot of developments in that happened in Egypt, and I'll go through that today for us. Uh, Week 5, there's a reading on Egyptian finances from 1810 to 1840 for you to look at. The readings are good. Some are a little more challenging than others, but it gives you an in-depth perspective of the kinds of topics that I would be able to cover in the face-to-face classes. Egypt is extremely important in our history from the first time we talked a little bit about it back in 231, and then we move along with it and we see how it becomes part of the Ottoman Empire and how the great slave armies, the Mamluk armies are there, and what happens during this time period of Mahmud II when we're talking and looking at what's going on as the Ottoman Empire begins to change. And next couple of weeks, I'm going to get into a little of that for you from a topical point of view. We know what we're going to be working on. Week 6 is the Ottoman Tanzimat, Hati Humayun. You'll say, well, what's all of that? These are programs that they have that where they actually are so visionary that they decide that, all right, if this is the way the West is going, we will not only equal the West, but we will surpass them in the changes that they're taking place and make them catch up to us. and then we can slow it down. Of all civilizations, this is the one that just about did it, almost did it. And it's masterful to look at it. I'll only be able to do a little of it next week on the Ottoman Tanzimat, what the reforms mean. Then we'll move into Abdul Hamid II, autocratic reforms, and back to Egypt. So it's all there on the syllabus for you to take a look at. I also had a good reading in there from the Cambridge History of Egypt, the era of Mehmet Ali, and then the audio podcast. Those are from the Ottoman History podcast. And then the media clip I had, I think, is exceptional because that's from Tel Aviv University. Um, it's the courses that they have as well. So it gives you a real grounded view from perspective right from the Middle East. The discussion question you had is focused on Mehmet Ali, is focused on Egypt, is focused on the contributions that Mehmet Ali and others made. All right, so what's coming up on the document case study then? Um, in the course material, there are all of the documents. You needed to select one, and then what was due February 5th was a summary document. It's one page. It's all in the syllabus for you. The questions are there. These are draft questions. And then question two, the key people, the key country, or the key empire. That was due on the 12th. And then coming up, of course, not this Friday because as the exam is in there, the following Friday is the contract applications. And I'll try to end a little bit early and kind of walk through those with my slides so that you have an idea of what those constructs are. So if you need help, don't, we're taking it one at a time, one question at a time. The goal is to, we don't want to wait to the end of the semester and try to answer all these questions in May because that's going to impact this mastery learning. You need to do a little bit of it in sequencing, follow the sequence and look at the questions and try to respond to the questions based on what document that you selected. And that'll get you engaged in a document and you'll be actually learning, teaching yourself as you get into this document because each document's different and you'll have the ability then to ask me questions, meet, email to talk about how you're doing on the paper. So if you haven't gotten in the first two, please get those in. There's a link, I think, in the assignments where you can put it in. I'll look at it, and I've broken it down to so many points. But the big points are going to be when you turn the paper in the last week, which is week 16. It's May 21st. However, week 14, you can answer. You have all the questions answered. You can email me the completed paper. I'll look at it, give you some suggestions and ideas if you need it, how to improve it, kind of give you a temporary mark, and then you have week 15 to make all the necessary changes so that you can increase your mark on the paper if you need to. But working along for so many weeks, I think you'll do fine. All right. Now, what do we have? I think that's all that I needed to cover at this time. I'll turn it over to you for any questions, comments, anything I can do at this point to help you before I get into Mehmet Ali today.
I'm good.
Okay. Any questions, comments, anything I can help you with content wise? Doing okay working on the exam questions. I think there's enough questions there and enough variety. You ought to be able to kind of hone in on three and kind of enjoy writing about something and not being, I got to go into a class and do it in an hour and 15 minutes or turn in some kind of massive paper on some kind of take home exam. So these are essay questions based on uh, what I've been talking about, plus what you've been reading about, plus what's in the text materials. All right, so let me move into Mehmet Ali. If you have any questions through this, you can interrupt me, say, Professor Harkins, I have a question, and I will stop and be happy to help you on that question. All right, what goes it in the background is our map of the Ottoman Empire, and you can see it's been the same map. It's always good to take a look at that map because what it shows us, uh, pretty interesting, is how a core radiates out to the farthest extremes, which are often referred to as the periphery, and then what it costs to maintain the periphery. Some expand to a point where they just don't want to go any further because they won't be able to work it. And if there's any problems, major issues, major problems, or wars that take place, the whole core could tip and move off center, and then the great fire and flame of the core that keeps it going literally falls apart. It's sort of like a bicycle or any kind of wheel that has spokes. You're not going to do too well if all the spokes are out of the wheel. Then that's what you see in a junkyard where there's this part of this wheel with a hub, and you wonder what happened to the spokes. Well, the spokes broke off and generally went somewhere else, or they, in a sense, deteriorated or collapsed. So we'll move forward with this, and you get a good idea of what's happening, and then I'll close with some of those constructs. Uh, he arrives in Egypt in 1801. He's a military officer. He's Albanian. Um, they like him. Uh, the Sultan's staff and others think that he's good. He's second in command of Selim III's army, and he's put in there because of Napoleon. So what happens out of Albania, out of the Balkans, many of these individuals have gone through the palace school. They've been active, and as a result of that, um, they move into a position of authority in the military. And he comes in, he's only 32 years of age in 1801, and there he is, Albanian descent, and now he's here in Egypt. And this army, he's got to stand against Napoleon army because that's the view that the Sultan, and he'll serve a number of different sultans as well, and sort of set up kind of an independent uh, state for a while. And the sultans will rely on him in Egypt, but he always has a kind of a different idea as to what Egypt should become. We know what's going to happen in Greece. We've already done that, so we step back a little bit and look at these developments that take place. Well, here he is, second in command of an Ottoman army, and these are powerful armies. Um, some modernization, they'll they'll work with Napoleon for a while with cannons and rifles, and they'll throw them off, and then the British will come in and show them some things of how to do police force work, like military police, and how to control local civilians. And they'll throw those folks off, and then the French will come in. So what they're doing is, we really don't want one group dominating all of us. You might have a few things we can use, but we have a different way. Oftentimes, you don't see any of that. It's never talked about. You don't see how the Ottomans basically took care of the civilian population. You don't see how they enforced taking care of their own soldiers. All you see is British police, and you see French gendarmes, and you see this whole aspect of what comes in from France as well, and that kind of just it's so much of a haze. When you look through it, you see the other side of what they were doing. So they really don't like a lot of these, but because they're moving back and forth, because this French Revolution is a big problem for them, because they've got France and Britain competing out in their backyard and around the Nile and up into the Black Sea. And it's like, wait a minute here. And so the Sultan move very cautiously, and sometimes will ally with different countries, with the main interest trying to save the empire from being overrun by these folks, because they know that if Napoleon comes in and he gets up into Istanbul and attacks the Russians, that he isn't going to go home. He's got an idea of world nation clear across India. Napoleon's another Alexander, and the Ottomans know that, and the Iranians know, Persians know, and they link very heavily with the Afghan people, thinking, this is, you know, just the aura of this French Revolution and Napoleon. He is bigger than big, and they're scared. They hear the stories of these soldiers just massacring others in war, and these cannons and these are and cavalry and all of this, and they're thinking like, they never see anything like this. And once they kind of get through it, they find out that they oftentimes get scared when there's really no reason to be scared of, but the image, the propaganda that comes ahead of them is like, we're done. Um, and so they're very cautious in this. So he's fighting against Napoleon, and that's no easy task like that. And I think one of the reasons why the Sultan may have put him there is because Mehmet Ali, many of these out of the Balkans, boy, if you needed to recruit generals for armies, they throughout history they're first in line, and then the Kurds, and so they're good. It doesn't bother them that it's Napoleon, and they know that they radiate that. He used to, Mehmet Ali used to walk in the streets, and occasionally when his soldiers were a day or two late with their pay, they take pot shots at him. They didn't hit him, they didn't wound him, but they came real close. But he still walked in the streets. He was fearless, and sometimes the money doesn't come from you know the the Sultan, doesn't come from Istanbul, doesn't come. Damascus is a big financial center, so the money's got to come there. And sometimes, just everything doesn't get there. It's like somebody mails something to you in the post office, and you're supposed to get it on this day. Well, maybe you get it the next day, or sometimes you get it early. But who knows when you get it? And this he is like, fearless. No, no, and he basically will talk to the troops and said if he had the money, he'd give them then, and just stop taking shots at him. And they do, because he told them the truth. It's like I can't give it to you unless I have it. And you read those stories about that. So Egypt just doesn't quite have a lot of reserve money set aside because it's got to come from the empire. And so he's Albanian descent. Um, and so the British, they get into Egypt and they're going to leave. They left Egypt in 1803. So this is a round robin of things going on. Now, here's the groups that are ruling in Egypt when he arrives there. There's an Ottoman governor. Okay. There's the Mamluks. All right. There's the people of Cairo. And then there's some Albanians there. There's an Albanian community. You know, when you look at Egypt and you look at the Middle East, you're thinking like, what do you mean an Albanian community? Well, they came from Albania, which is modern day, which is Albania. It's in the Balkans, and they came to Egypt a long time ago, and they worked there in naval shipyards, doing all kinds of things. So there's an Albanian community there. Just like in these areas here in Chicago, you've got a Chinese community, a Polish community, you've got Greek town, you have all that. So in Egypt is the same way. It's very multicultural group. And they like being in their own neighborhoods. I mean, it's like, well, no, we're going to take you and move you to the southern part of Egypt. You'll have a riot on your hands. They don't want to go to the southern part of Egypt. They want to live right where they've been living for a number of years, 100 plus years. And so they're there. Those are the four groups. The Ottoman governor has a group. The Mamluks is the slave, is the army. They're not all slaves. They go back in history that they were, but they're an elite group. Um, and then the Albanians are there, and then we have better known the people of Cairo. Okay, so all this is going on, and he's there. Um, so the British leave Egypt. Now, what's going to happen? And so, second in command, and then as the commander uh, of the forces are there, eventually, Mehmet Ali is going to, I know, be a key player in this. So his officers, junior officers, come to him and say, well, what's going to happen here? The British are leaving, and he said, well, we could side with the Mamluks. We can go along with the Mamluks, okay? And what he proceeds on doing is driving the Egyptian governor out of office. That's what he does. Okay. It is an Ottoman governor, but ruling in Egypt. And so that's the first thing we got to do is get that governor out of because he just hasn't been doing what he needs to be doing here. And so we want to get him out of Cairo. All right. To see how smart he is, I'll kind of go through the rest of it so you can see uh, what's happening. So he sides with the Mamluks. Out goes the Ottoman governor, and now we've got a little bit of a power vacuum that's there as the major military commander. When the British pull out, heads back to Istanbul. Who is the commander of the army? Leaves Mehmet Ali there, and so he's caught in between all these, and he knows what's going to happen. This is going to be a squeeze play, and he's not going to be involved in it. So he works the strategy. Okay. And so then he starts meeting with the different groups in the Mamluk army, okay? Because they're powerful. There's more of them than his army. And the Ottomans have Ottoman uniforms. They're like a federal system. They're the imperial troops, and the Mamluks aren't really. They've been there in Egypt a long time. It's like the French Foreign Legion. That's the Mamluk is that cluster. All right, and they have different enclaves like that. So what he does, he goes in and pits one against the other. That's right. He pits one group in different groups in the Mamluk army against each other. Okay, that's what he does. Turned them against each other. He's smart. And then he goes to the people of Cairo, explaining to them that there's a strong possibility that the Mamluks are going to overrun my imperial army and basically take over all of Cairo and all of your jobs and your farm areas and cotton, all these things. It's like, wow. Um, so you don't want to mess with the people of Cairo. They're very cosmopolitan. There's Greeks there. There's people from all over the empire, and a good number of Egyptians that have been there. Yes. And what happens is he gets the Cairo population so churned up that they chased the Mamluk army out, hmm out into the desert. They leave them out there. And the people of Cairo recognized that Mehmet Ali was really interested in them, in their future, and their trade, and their families. And they're tired of being overrun by, the French are there, the British are there, they've got the Russian, there's all these different groups. They don't want to be bothered by all of them. And so um, they wanted him to become their governor. It's like an election, but it's not people voting. If they didn't want him, they wouldn't have done that. They said you did what we couldn't do. The the Sultan didn't respond to us. Our entreaties fell on deaf ears. Is that the governor wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing. The governor was playing off the British, the French, all this time during this, and the people were suffering. As the British came in, they took more resources and supplies, and the citizens, the businesses of Cairo provided it. Oftentimes, these armies didn't pay for anything. They just took exactly what they wanted, and the people just didn't like it. It's a huge population in Cairo. Oh my goodness, huge population. So now we have, very quick, you can read much more about this, but it's such an interesting development. So um, then he appealed to Selim III to be officially appointed governor of Egypt. Isn't that nice? You see, it's not like I'm going to be. There's an appeal that this group of people that are here and all the problems that have taken place is that they really need me. But I appeal to you if that's in your great wisdom. So it goes up through the grand viziers as well to the sultan, and the sultan's smart enough to know that why not have him governor of Egypt? He'll be loyal to me. He just didn't take it. He's kind of an interim basis. So he follows the traditional protocol because he's an Ottoman officer. And so, why Selim III didn't move the previous one is another question as to what's moving on. This is a big empire. And these sultans, even though you read a little bit about them and you see the visuals and the things I have for you, they probably worked harder than anybody in the empire. I don't know who would want that job. It's one issue over another, and you've got so many things in so many different places. And now you know what we're coming up on that the Greek nationalism, because I did that last week now. So we're going to back up, and you're going to see what's happening in Egypt from another perspective. So the sultans tend to be a little more oriented toward North Africa, and it's very easy, to move through Syria and the Sinai, and boom, you're over into Egypt, and because Egypt's a big grain basket for the empire, and it's big for their navy and their creation of ships and all of that. Greece is too, but there's a little closer affinity to North Africa. All right, so now we have him moving into that position. And then what he did, he sided with the French. Okay, and the British were there, um, and he sides with the French. Now this is happening 1805, 1806, 1807, because he's smart enough to understand that the French have got a navy. Napoleon's got a plan. He wants to take over all of the Middle East, all of India, uh, and he move clear up into the Black Sea area, and then just destroy Russia and move in Russia. Of which he's going to not do it that way. He's going to come the other way, and it'll be a disaster for him, and it'll be the end of his campaign because of the Russian winter that takes place. And it's a phenomenal story into itself. So he's he has to move that way. Well, the people in Cairo are a little skeptical about that, but he manages to interface with the French pretty well because he could speak the language, knows of them. He's an imperial officer, right? He's a military officer. Was second in command, now he's first in command, and now he's the governor like that. Okay, and here's what happens with those troops. That's what imperial troops would do. It's all through history. You see it in movies, and they talk about it. Is the troops want to be paid? Well, because of what's going on in the empire, and we're past the time period of Karlovitz and the expansion, there just isn't the kind of revenue streams that are available. And so, as he looks at this, the idea is, well, if the um, empire and the sultan and the court and the royal revenues aren't able to support our imperial troops. He doesn't pay the imperial troops. It's they're like an imperial force. They get paid from the sultan, from the treasury. And so he thinks that maybe the time is that if governor here, he can get some things going to generate some revenue and really bring Egypt forward. He's a visionary, and Egypt likes this, what he's going to come up with. Okay, uh, first, he gets into land reforms and tax revisions, and well, everybody goes into those first. And I know in the philosophies in the Middle East and also the Far East, you always take on the hardest things first. This is he should have left these alone. Land reforms and tax revisions, you're not going to have much agreement on any of that. People don't like that because in land reforms, they're going to lose. Yeah, and tax revisions are going to pay. And those two they don't like. Nobody likes that. Well, you got too much land. We got to redraw the lines. Some of this should go back to the Sultan's land holdings, but you'll still have to pay taxes on that, plus what you have. And so, with all this struggle between what's going on in the French Revolution, he moves into these, but he'll move away from them and he'll shift to some others. Okay, there's where he's going to hit. He's going to hit a home run here. A government monopoly to export grain. Now, of course, the individuals that are producing, Egypt's been a breadbasket even at the time of the Romans. Caesar Augusta, Imperator, Augustus, Octavian, had Egypt off limits. You couldn't go there unless you had imperial permission. He had a number of legions stationed there to make sure that the grain uh, came through so it could go to Rome and other places for bread to feed people in the empire. All right. So Mehmet Ali with the growers and the producers and all that said, look, let's set up, let the government be in charge of this. We'll get our ships involved. We'll export the grain. We'll make sure you get more than you're getting now. Well, they're a little skeptical, but they've been kind of disorganized in that because everybody comes in and wants a deal. Somebody cuts the price a little lower and they'll buy theirs, and the people will be sitting high and dry until they lower their price. And people don't like that. So, in other words, we're going to set it up so that we're going to make sure that meaning his government, is going to give the best possible. And now they like that. That's much better than land reforms, and it's much better than talking about taxes. Because when they're talking about those taxes are never going down for them, and they know that. And the idea is, how much of my land am I going to lose? And then eventually, is like, we don't need him there anymore. Um, it has to be in moderation. So he's moving this along. Now remember, he's Albanian descent, but he's got tremendous training going through that palace school. They don't have anything like that today. Even ours that go through all this diplomatic and things like that. I don't think any of them there could speak 5 or 6 languages. If they did, I'd be excited. I'd like to know if they can do that. They don't study languages anymore. I don't know what they study, but this he knows that. This is the people know him. He knows economics and he knows what he needs, and that's why he goes after this land and this tax. But those are too complex. Until you have the trust of the people, that's one area you want to stay away from. So he's off here working with these exporting grain like that. Okay, but he needed to be rid of the Mamluks. Uh, they're a thorn in his side. Hmm. Yep. So what we have then is some strategy, some talking, because they're out in the desert, not going away. The citizens of Cairo ran them out of town. Is what they did, because they didn't want them in there causing a difficulty in the conflict between imperial troops and those Mamluk armies there. Even though the Mamluks are supposed to be loyal to the Sultan, they have their own generals that they're loyal to, and they like to get paid. And they have little quarters in parts of Cairo, things like that. They're moving along. Okay, and so in 1811, um, what happens is he invites them to Cairo, the citadel, on a pretext of citizenship. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Well, I think that's a good idea. They'd like to be citizens. Okay. And then what happens? They were killed.
Where did he invite them?
The citadel.
The
It's
Citadel.
inside
Okay.
of, yeah. hmm Yep. Yep. Killed them. They're destroyed. Yeah. He tricked them to enter the citadel in Cairo. And who slaughtered them? Albanian soldiers. Okay. That's 1811. In 1812, somewhere in Upper Egypt, they kill another 3,000 of them. That's right. Yeah. So I mean, this is what you do to eliminate the competition, because it was going to be sooner or later that the Mamluks were going to come in and overrun these people of Cairo, because they wouldn't be able to chase them out of town again from a military point of view. When all that's going on, when he sets up this government monopoly, grain profits rose 500%. And his philosophy was more money, more loyalty. Take care of the needs of the people. Okay. They'll be loyal to you because you did something for them. And they're wondering how come they didn't do this before. And when all that happens, who do they blame? Somebody, they blame the Mamluks for it. And so the next plan is, well, then we're going to have to just get rid of the Mamluks early period of these slave army. Not all of them are eradicated. There's stories along those lines, but a good number of them uh, were killed by Albanian troops. The Albanian troops, of course, were loyal to Mehmet Ali because he's Albanian. So most students, folks, have no idea that Albanians are in Egypt. They'll say, "Well, what were they doing in Egypt? They should be in Albania." But they didn't. You see, this is their home. This is the empire. They feel free to travel anywhere they want here. It's not like, I mean, it's sort of like, you can drive to Iowa or Florida, whatever you want, and you don't have anybody checking you all the time with papers and passports and going from one place to the next. And in wartime, they would have a little of that. So the people in Egypt would really think nothing of these individuals. And there were Egyptians that were in Albania. They just moved all through this area like that because it was safe to do that. But right now, it's not, because we've got Russia and Britain and fighting this French imperial Napoleon, wanting to take over all of these areas and causing great consternation in the world. And right on the border of all of this is none other than who, the Ottoman Empire. And the last thing they want to do is to get in another war with Russia, another war with um, uh, Napoleon, another war with Britain. And at the same time, when they're there, um, they're basically uh, taking Egyptians and others and putting them in their armies, or having them load ships, or having them cook food. I mean, they turn them into basically, servants and slaves like that. And that's what was going on in Cairo until Mehmet Ali said, "We got to get this. We got to get this out of here." Um, and change it. So that's the impact of the Mamluks. You can read about it. I'm just kind of giving you an overview so you get a sense in there. And I had some good material in the modules for you. Then in 1812. There's another 1,000. That's a good number. That's a conservative number. If you want to know the other number, uh, they're saying at least 3,000. And so I remember Mehmet Ali has got imperial troops with him. Plus, he's got Albanian troops that are there. And some of the troops in the imperial army were Albanians. They let them cluster together. We did some of that, but we changed it in our wars. Like the Civil War, you could get people from your towns and your county would all kind of fight together in your state. Well, these folks wanted to do that, and that's Roman. I mean, the Romans would do the same thing, and that's a pretty powerful system. The Romans did it a little better. Let's say you have a cohort of troops, and you're missing. You lost eight. They're wounded or they were killed, and so you have to have recruits. Okay, the unit picked the recruits. So they would say, here's a pool of 50, or send them over there to talk to this cohort, and the cohort would talk to them and decide whether they wanted them whether they wanted them to join and they wanted them to fight with them. They picked their own. Yeah, it wasn't somebody say, here's a replacement troop. Lately in our history, when you get after World War I, and World War II and these other conflicts, the replacements would show up and you didn't have any choice. Romans didn't do that, and neither did the imperial troops, because you always get, if you don't like them and they're from whatever the reason is, then it'll affect the ability of the unit to do what it's supposed to do. And sometimes the Roman units would just they'd fight short. They were always short. There was no legion in the history of Rome that ever was fully staffed with legionnaires. None. I mean, you read those numbers the same way here with these imperial troops. They were smart enough to figure out, let them decide. They're going to have to fight with them if they don't like them, and if they keep coming back, and so these people are turned down in the Sultan's army. The Sultan will find other work for them to do, bringing the cannons up and taking care of horses. We'll find a place for you. But when it comes to people that are out there fighting, we're we're going to let the people doing the fighting pick the people that they want to join their unit. Sometimes by family, sometimes by region, sometimes by ethnicity, sometimes by language, because uh, maybe they didn't know all of the different languages. And when you're in a pitched battle and you're yelling, and people got to understand you. We had that same problem in World War I. I mean, they write it down, they couldn't read it, they couldn't understand them. We got through it, but that was very, very difficult. So you can see how the Sultan's imperial army worked. Um, it's elastic and it's flexible, and when you're that way, you're going to do much better. Okay, the Sultan directs him to restore order to Arabia. So here's the next uh, issue that comes in for the great Mehmet Ali. It's like, wow, we got to restore order. What's going on? Well, we have a problem in Arabia, uh, and now Mehmet Ali is going to uh, get involved. He's going to have his son, Ibrahim. He's going to have contact with the Grand Vizier. So he's got to go in now because the Sultan directs him. This isn't, you to restore order to Arabia, meaning the part of the Arabian Peninsula. You can see from the map that I've got goes to there. Okay, so he's going to do that. That's what he wants him to do. Okay, well, he takes care of that. Uh, and what happens is they move into to Arabia. Um, they uh, they run them down. There's a last group of Mamluks there. They get down into the Sudan and Khartoum. Mehmet Ali's building a great fleet, and in order to build the great fleet, uh, in order to sail not only the Mediterranean but down into the Gulf area, he goes to Greece. He brings these Greek shipbuilders over, and all of these things are happening. And then, as the Sultan and the core of the imperial system realizes that that's what's going on, remember 1821, we talked about that. 4 years after that, Mehmet Ali invades Greece. This is oftentimes overlooked, but it's very important because he's a warrior, and he invades it, and he's doing pretty well for a while, but then he can't hold it. He can't hold it, which means what what's happening in the southern Peloponnesus that I covered last week. This is how it comes together a little bit. It's even it's harder for him with an imperial army, with Albanians and others, and Greeks fighting with him, and all those Greek shipbuilders that he came to Egypt to build ships because they got treated better in Egypt. Um, they killed it, and so the Sultan's realization is that he's going to be able to hold Greece. Um, because Mehmet Ali's troops, if you destroyed the Mamluks and chased them all over the desert areas, and you went in and took back all the necessary controls in Arabia, right? That's right. And those folks that were disloyal in Arabia were brought back to Istanbul, and they were incarcerated, and they had some kind of a adjudication. And the Sultan deals with that is that you can't be doing these things in the empire, right? And so this is what Mehmet Ali is doing. So it's it's really interesting to see him uh, in action here. And what he does, he builds an army, and I'll try to move this along a little bit because he's really uh, builds an army of 150,000 men. Why? Because what he what was going on in Greece was much more than he could handle with some Albanian community members who aren't officially trained, and then he's got his own imperial army that went there. Uh, and now we're going to build an army of 150,000 because what we don't want is we're not going to lose Egypt, and we're not going to lose that. So Alexandria is now a naval arsenal. So that's what he builds up. So they're shifting the focus from Greece to uh, Alexandria. Alexandria, after Alexander is beautiful. Most of it's underwater now, and you can see the steps going down, and it's marble. When the water's clear, the level is up. This is the great city of Alexander. 1829, it's a naval arsenal. Now they're going to produce weapons there. They're going to build ships. This is the naval focus. He's on his way. Okay. And then when Selim III is out, 1833, he there's some rivalries there in the transfer of power. That's a transition of power, and he comes up in setting up a peace agreement um, with um, Mahmud. Okay, yeah, okay, and as a result of that, he goes deep into Anatolia. You know where Anatolia is. If we get our little pointer, these areas here. So he's coming out of Egypt. He's coming up through the Sinai, the area of Palestine, into Syria, and he's into these areas here to provide order and stability. All right, that's right. And so in 1833, Egypt, Syria, right, Crete, Tarsus, Adana are all assigned to Mehmet Ali. And in return, he's got to make sure that the tribute is paid from these areas to the Ottomans. You know why the Ottomans don't have money? You know why those troops weren't paid? Because the former governor in Egypt never sent the tribute money that was required to fund the imperial system. And Sultan couldn't, force him to do it. But when Mehmet Ali got down there, they ran the governor out. He becomes governor. He asks the Sultan, then puts him in at Selim III. And now the reason why the empire is not doing well is that these areas like Syria and Tarsus and Crete um, weren't paying the dues. That's right. They weren't paying their tribute. You see, to run roads and to build ships and to take care of all the supplies, everything that you need, like the federal roads and all, like our roads and others, you've got to pay. You got to pay for those like taxes. I said, well, that's tribute. I said, well, you don't understand what tribute is here. Tribute is like a tax. And so, these troops are showing up out here, and they're shooting at their commander, their second in command, because they haven't been paid because the Sultan doesn't have the money because the governor ahead of time was just pocketing the money and having a great relationship with the British and French that are coming in. And this is going to be linger on throughout the history of these Middle Eastern countries, is where you get these leaders in charge who then pocket the money and get loans and grants from foreign governments and all of that, and it never gets down to the people. And you wonder why the people are rioting and want to get rid of them. And so Mehmet Ali does what the Sultan wants him to do. Now, you read other perspectives on that, but what he does, he manages to get a hold of this territory in 1833, and the Sultan says, "All right, that's fine. You can kind of be the governor of these areas, the overlord, and but in return, you've got to get them to pay their tribute." Well, the military is going to enforce paying the tribute. Well, where do they get the tribute? Well, they got it from some of the people. But if you're not exporting grain and you're not doing what you need to be doing, the people don't have any money to pay you. And the money that is collected, the governors or their assistants or others would just pay a little bit, and the empire couldn't exist on it. So what's happening is the periphery decides, thank you for building all of this. You gave us all this, and now I'm just not going to pay you anymore. And so without the pay, the periphery is going to collapse. The core will start to collapse because the core doesn't have enough money to keep them going. And so they'll look to across their border and create some kind of a revolution or some kind of a war and take the core out and say, we're great, aren't we? And then how can they function? They have no ordering mechanisms. It's just chaos. And so it goes through cycles. Middle East is since 1922. It's almost 100 years, and we should be out of that cycle because when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, or just they just ceased to exist on that day in 1922. We've had nothing but difficulty because there's the squabbling gets into all kinds of um, problems between countries. These are small areas, and for years they got along, and then for years they don't get along. And so Mehmet Ali is trying to create something out of this, right? And so in 1839, got to move into Syria because Syria is just not cooperating. So he's on his way here. So he's into Syria. So what he becomes is sort of, enforcing this because there's this tendency as the core weakens for the periphery from the outside in. There's all this uneasiness is like, well, we don't need to pay them. We can just go it on our own. Well, who's going to defend them? Who's going to ship the goods? Who's going to take care of the roads and the postal system and ensure that the people are safe? They want security. They want education. They want their religious beliefs. They want protection. I want to live in chaos. No, no, no. Don't want to do that. Okay. 1839, Mahmud died. The Ottoman fleet deserted and joined the Egyptian fleet at Alexandria. Okay, and that's where Mehmet Ali is. That becomes an arsenal. Why do you think the Ottoman fleet deserted? How long are you going to be in the Navy and not get paid, not get food, not get the equipment you have, and then all of a sudden they're going to send you in battle and your ship's leaking and you don't have the sails and the material that you need because the income hasn't come in? Because that's what happens when you stop expanding. You got to have a shift in revenue. You got to have a strong enough economy to make it work, and you can't have that if everything is cut off by Napoleon controlling all of the navy. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you said the Ottoman fleet deserts. So they left the Black Sea and went down to Alexandria. Okay,
Sailors did, yeah. Some of the ships did, yeah.
gotcha.
They were loyal to Mahmud, but they weren't going to be loyal to the next one. In other words, and the Russians note that, and that gets the Russians moving along. See, it's allocation. So, and if I handed you $1 or 100 pennies, where are you going to apply them to? These sultans got a tough job because they got to figure out where to get the revenues to the empire because the fleet protected the trade. And if you don't have a fleet, you're not going to do that. So what happens is they like what Mehmet Ali is doing because he managed to increase that grain production, export about 500% because everybody needs that. He knows what it is. And then the Greeks deserted. Many of them left Greece, and Greek shipbuilding just it just becomes very static for a long period of time. It's how you treat people, and it's the opportunity. Uh, North Africa's got a greater diversity. There's diversity in Greece as well, but the question is, why did the Greek shipbuilders in Greece leave Greece and go to Egypt? A, they were unhappy. B, they were on a seeing adventure. C, there was better treatment, jobs, and employment. And D, none of the above. No, yeah, they liked. They were attracted there for a reason, and Shipbuilders like to build ships. They don't like to sit around. That's a great skill to watch them do those. The history of shipbuilding. The Greeks, before the time of Alexander, were some of the greatest shipbuilders in the world. And the trade and shipping, like the Onassis family, and trading all over the world with all these ships. So you can see that here. Let me just give you a couple more. I'm going to try to shift off and introduce those constructs for you. The Ottomans regained Mecca. So now what we have is we're moving over uh, into this area, this that uh, Iraq, and we're moving into Iran, and we're moving down into the Arabian, down into Arabia. So we're going to get Mecca and Medina. So from the groups that had taken it and the Mamluks over there, the Ottomans regain it. And the people are very happy because the pilgrimages are reopened. So we're moving to the east a little bit. This is what Mehmet Ali is doing. Egypt then becomes a hereditary province, which means his sons and others would be able to inherit it. All right, pretty interesting to see that as it begins to develop. Um, Different treaties are going to be put together like that, and so we've got the fleet. Ali is a master of these situations, and the Ottomans were prepared to give him hereditary control over territories that he possessed. It's much like the feudal system in Japan, feudal lord, hereditary rights to certain positions. So, what they're doing is you see the shift is moving away to very strong, um, sort of feudal type systems run by hereditary families, just like you would see at the Sultan. So we're going to create these smaller enclaves, and this is what's happening. Okay. 1847, he's sick and he dies in 1848, like that. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm.
Do they know what took him?
Yeah. Yeah. He got it's some kind of uh, like a respiratory infection, is what you can read all kinds of accounts on it, but I think that's pretty much what happened to him um, in that process. Uh, and his sons, he was older, but he was a worker. All right, let me give you the conclusion of this, and then I'm going to shift over into those constructs a little bit. Okay. The Europeans didn't like what they saw, so about 4 years, well, about 1840 is when it happens. The idea is that the European powers say they don't like what Ali is doing, and the European powers say to the Ottomans that he shouldn't do anything in this area of Egypt and these areas that he controls, okay, without their approval. Okay, so the Europeans, the Sultan, that um, don't authorize, agree to any actions on Ali like that. Wow. And so um, they don't like him becoming this powerful individual in this region. He's very successful. The idea is hereditary. They don't like that. Um, and they want a settlement from him. And the four powers, and you know who they are, say, if you don't agree, we're going to blockade Egypt and we're going to get the Sultan to go along with us. Hmm. And he wouldn't move. No, no, they moved against his son, and he's forced to accept British terms. He moves out of Arabia. Um, he returns power to the groups that were in Arabia, uh, but they do regain Mecca, uh, and Egypt is left to the hereditary as a hereditary province to Ali and his heirs. The size of the army is lowered to 18,000. He was old, he was sick, respiratory issues. He ruled Egypt for 40 years. Hmm. He was what we call a benevolent despot. Yeah. He promoted agricultural uh, dynamic steam pumps, canals, summer irrigation, yields doubled, brought in industrialization, textile plants, sugar refineries, industrialization, started health centers to improve the health of the people. The population is increasing, provided security to the people, brought in schools, polytechnical schools, neoclassical, and for the first time, the students were taught by Egyptian teachers. He was an innovator, rebuilt canals, improved the trade relations. The population is increasing. Uh, all of these things, technical schools, brought in neocultural revolution, reading the classics, the ancients, brought back what, who the Egyptians were and what they had done, like that. Wow. I could go on for the rest of the class period on this, but that gives you a little idea like that. Okay. So his contributions are legendary. Exported directly from Egypt to Europe without going through anybody else. That's what the Navy did. All right, let me close this down. I want to hit the constructs just for a few minutes. I'll um, do these again for you because you got to be thinking about them because question 3 is coming up. What are they? Okay, some of you know from last semester. These are engines. There's tools of history. We use them to try to figure out what's going on. And I have enough time to talk about the super constructs. So what is a construct? Well, it's a tool. As I've been talking about all of this, just like the civilization cycle that we have. Um, these constructs are tools to take a look at things. So I'll do the 3 super constructs today for you, and you can get an idea how they fit in. So when you look at question 3, you'll be able to use these um, to apply to your document. Okay, the first one is order and stability. Okay, so what I covered today is Mehmet Ali. That's a key to success. No matter what civilization, what time in history, when they walked out of the Zagros Mountains a long time ago, all they wanted was order and stability and to be left alone and take care of their families, grow their crops, and focus on their own beliefs. And so what you need to do is you need to look at your document and say, what kind of order and stability do I have? And you can say, well, my document is in the Ottoman Empire. If it's anything from 1453 to 1922, it's there. And their order and stability is one that's referred to as a decentralized system. They have provincial governors that have a lot of power. And when those governors don't work right, you see what happens. So Mehmet Ali is very successful because he focuses on order and stability. In order to do that, he has to do some things that normal folks wouldn't want to do. Is the biggest problem that Egypt had at that time was the Mamluks, and you know what he did, and increasing all these contributions in the literature and what you had to write on this week talks about it in much more detail as well. So it's order and stability. How do you provide that? What mechanisms are there? Well, you have postal systems, you have roads, uh, you have a fleet, you have to do trade, you have to export like that. So Edmund Ali cuts off all the trade that would go through other countries, and he exports directly to um, Europe without having to go through middlemen, sell to middlemen, and you know who those are, Italian, many of them, that then will give you a lot less, and they'll sell for a lot more. So he's cutting all that out, and he's going directly to Europe with trade, just as the Romans did. So in your document, you have to explain the time of your document that it was created, what kind of order and stability is there. And you can say, well, the order and stability is an imperial system, and this is how it works. You know, the Ottomans have all these institutions, and they're pretty structured, and the provinces pay, and the revenue comes in. Um, we expand it to a certain point, and after Karlovitz, the expansion stops, and they try to hold on, and people keep beating on the borders to come into the abode of peace, and they don't want the abode of war. They don't need the French Revolution and all those folks coming out there fighting in Egypt, in Cairo, practicing their cannons on some of the great monuments. They didn't like that, not at all. And some people like Napoleon and the British armies and the Russians are there pretty rude about historical monuments and culture. All right, that's the first one. The second one is the transitions of power. So at the time of your document, who is in charge? If you've got some of those, maybe that Eisenhower document or Balfour document. All right, so find out who is in charge. So if you've got a sultan in your document, okay, who is the sultan, and how did that person get there, and what happened to him? So I gave you today when Mahmud died, the fleet just basically left. Not all of them. That was 1839. So you have to explain in your document. It's called the transition of power. We like them to be very peaceful, and sometimes they're not. It just depends. You know, you may strive for something. You say what happens. Well, so when Mahmud died, you can see what happened. It wasn't in the next sultan's coming in is going to be peaceful, but the fleet taking off, that's not very peaceful. That leaves you wide open with the Russians on the Crimea area to pour in there and cause all kinds of havoc. So who is the person in charge at the time of your document? You got a year or a couple of years or a number of years. Who's running the empire? Who's running the country that you're in? And how did that person get there? Did he get elected? You saw today, I gave you the example how Mehmet Ali got there, right? Well, sure. He asked the Sultan. The Sultan said, sure. I mean, well, you went through the Grand Viziers. It's very formal. You could read all of that. The documents are once if you get the translation documents, they're a real classic to read because it's very formal kind of proposal for this, and then word comes back. So the Ottomans take their time. So the transition of power, is it orderly or disorderly? And the last one that we'll do for today then is what are the expectations? All documents are crafted for certain reasons. They expect people to do certain things. So in your document, who's ever writing it, what do they expect people to do? Just like those ones some of you have been writing about, the demands of the Young Turks and things like that. Well, they expect to have all these rights and a constitution, voting, and all of those things. Those are pretty well Western. Eh, Those come out of the areas of the steppes when Osman and his family group headed out to Bursa and started, the Ottoman Empire. Uh, so whatever document you have, what are the expectations? So think about them. If you need any help, let me know. We can always meet and collaborate. So for next Friday, if you could work on the first three for your paper and applying those, that'll be great. If you need help, let me know and I'll meet with you, email you, and we'll get that moving along. And then next week, I'll talk about the major and minor constructs for you. You should be fine. Okay. Now remember, if you're interested in attending Docs Teach, you just listen, and the National Archives will show you different documents and how to use them in different collections. Send me an email so I can put you on the list. I have to send a list in at the end of the day as to who might attend so that they can put your name on the list. And then when you hit the link and you type in your name, you will be admitted to the session. There's no charge, no cost to it. Uh, it's good educational, historical kinds of information that could help you in the future. Okay, my apologies. We are over. Uh, Keep up the good work. We know what's coming up next week. I'm going to get into Tanzimat, Hadi Humayun, and what the Ottomans are trying to do to keep ahead of the Europeans along the way. Okay.